don't want to move too far away.
But I noticed shoes, people yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And this is after.
I haven't done it yet. Bobby's been asking us to do it. I want to see one of the states now.
So, yeah, so
I think it's that way. That's actually right. Towards this paper. Get discounts and now we can get these programs.
We've been very handsome. Yeah, we have been very happy.
Something to do with it. You had to be at a point nothing to travel. How's it up? How's it up?
The name again? Very pretty. Lots of that.
So this means
Record hindsight levels last year. Columbus will that.
These 6 inches.
Yeah, I think our daughter sent us a photo of son and their oldest grandson. 5 minutes. Visiting his brother, then they're going to go to Scranton for an interview. So there was a picture. Shovel, deep snow.
Yeah.
Snow is much better.
My son loves it cold and loves the snow. Unlike he likes the ice cream. That's not good. That Shamish silver, but you know.
How are you?
Yeah, if you want to.
You recovered? You recovered?
I only wear a mask when I'm cousin. You should wear a mask.
No.
My neighborhood apartments website.
Okay, thank you all so much for coming. I've got the great to introduce Jonathan Rosenblum tonight. So many of you have seen these articles in the Shpaka magazine. He's been writing for over 25 years, or 30 years, and he's written over 10 books. He has the Jewish Media Resources, is a leading media organization dedicated to furthering understanding of Torah Judaism. Jewish Media Resources works with foreign journalists stationed in Israel and works with local journalists by providing access to leading figures when attending the Orthodox Jewish community in Israel and with information and insights about the community. Jonathan Rosenblum is Director of Jewish Media Resources, also serves as the English language spokesman for the Orthodox Jewish community with foreign journalists. And he's kicking off our series, our winter series of speakers. And so we're very honored to have you here. We appreciate it. And at the end, we have an organization called Operation Home Again that's being headed by Shimon Appelsdorf, which is bringing communities as a whole from North America. And if anyone's interested in being involved, the first community is launching this summer in Afua. So we'll give you confidence that you may be interested in being involved. Without further ado, appreciate you coming. I must start with some bad news. Jewish Media Resources has been closed for the last 15 years, but the second piece of bad news, I'm not a rabbi. I think it's important that actually let people know that these days, so nobody, for better or worse, I'm not a rabbi. Okay, this talk tonight, I think, represents the conclusion of a three-part cycle in Ramat Beit Shemesh. 20 years ago, I spoke at a gathering. They didn't have a shul for Rabbi Kornfeld's shul to be, and I urged the people there to take seriously the idea of being something very important to contribute to Eretz Israel, and Dafka, an American style shul, would have a very important contribution to make, and that they should take seriously what that contribution should be, and it probably would not be simply imitating the closest Israeli Haredi model that they could find. About 9 years ago, I spoke in another English-speaking shul in Ramat Beit Shemesh. That was at the time, you may remember, where there was a whole hullabaloo with the bass and girls who were being spat upon as they came out of their classrooms. And then I told the audience that night, you guys should have been out there. You should have been out there protecting them. The more Haredi you look, the better it would have been if you had been out there. You could have appreciated that it was wrong, bad sin, what was being done to them, and it was disastrous for our community, and you should have been out there. And here we are tonight with what you can do to contribute to the mass Aliyah, which I happen to believe is to come. The common theme of all these speeches, of course, is that I obviously believe that the English-speaking community, and not just, but the immigrant community to Eretz Israel has a very unique and important contribution to make, which I'll get to in a second. I want to explain my topic. Everybody who does the speaking circuit, or was once the speaking circuit, COVID has pretty much taken that away, has at least 4 or 5 speeches that they've given 40 times, which flow trickily from the tongue. And obviously the ones that a person feels strongly about it when they're given it 40 times, even a speaker can get bored. But the truth is I've never given a speech before. I spent a week doing research in order to be able to speak on this topic. The reason that I decided to go outside of my comfort zone a little bit is November 23rd, I published an article in Mishpacha called Planning for the Coming Aliyah. And after that appeared, somebody wrote to me and saying, you perpetuated the stereotype in Israel. You either are in full-time kollel or you've closed your Gemara and you've gone to work and you'll self-open it from one way to the next. And so that's simply not true in our community. And it occurred to me that that person likely lived in Ramat Beit Shemesh,
And it was no less a possibility in my mind that he davened in this shul. So I thought that, well, you know, that's a good topic. This is a topic. And just to hint at some of the things that I believe that our community, I mean, I'm an immigrant of 42 years, but if you ask my children, I might as well just gotten off the boat, to judge by my Hebrew. I mean, they're no longer in the house, and my grandchildren are too young to tell me that I should not speak around their friends. But but the truth is that I've always had a feeling that we have a lot to contribute here. One of the things that we have to contribute is the model of a shul with a rabbi. I mean, it's very rare amongst Israelis. Nobody wants to be the rabbi of a shul where everybody is sikh, where everybody's in Talmud Chacham, or thinks he is. It's not an easy job to be the rabbi of a shul. And Israelis are not generally looking for somebody to be their mentor. For a while in the shul, one of the shuls in which I davened, so we were so lucky to have Rav David Miller, the head of the Bruce Korel, the head of the Bruce Korel of YU as our Rav. And he would do strange things like appear at school meetings with parents who were having some kind of problem with the school. And they would say to him, well, who are you? And he'd say, I'm their Rav. And they'd say, what's that? I mean, it was incomprehensible to the schools in general why somebody other than the parents of the student in question might be there. But that wasn't, in fact, an important role, especially if the parents were very new in the country. It could be very salutary. There are a lot of things in which America simply, or North America, and maybe all of the Kunz arts is maybe advanced in certain areas. For instance, the recent traumas that this community has suffered would have certainly been mitigated in America. The idea of a male counselor counseling women doesn't exist. I mean, it once existed, it doesn't exist anymore. As Rabbi Berkowitz, or Yitzhak Berkowitz, said to a group of mental health professionals a week ago, what is this? We have plenty of competent women. There's no reason for a man ever to be counseling. There's no reason for a therapist to be counseling women. And that's an idea that's already long been accepted in America, but it wasn't accepted here. The other major contribution is, and this is something in which I think Rav Shemish has distinguished itself, is the idea that you need more than one model of education. The one size does not fit all. You cannot cram every child into the same model. If you have a child who asks you when he's in 6th grade, what am I going to be when I grow up? And the only answer that you can give him is that you're going to be a kolo avreich, and he's already struggling in able to see us, then you basically told that child that you'll never distinguish yourself in any particular fashion. You're trapped. You sort of signed a death warrant on it. That doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of kids who are not flourishing in 6th grade and become. In fact, how many there are. But to count on that and to tell them that this is the only path in life that is open to you is a big mistake. And I think in this community, particularly, we've gotten away from that model that the only thing will be is called right? Parents here are certainly more concerned with what's called the secular education of their children. But I was told recently by somebody who heads the Haredi desk at Nefesh B'Nefesh that one of the Chadarim here in Ramat Beit Shemesh won the prize for the best secular studies department, a cheder which emphasizes this. In Yerushalayim today, they're opening up all over the place. Rav Ruben Wechter is opening up a cheder, and there are others. Chadarim, where secular studies is not a dirty word, it's not something that has to be avoided. And in fact, I think most of these things do find the haskama of many Gedolim. And Rav Weiss once said to me, why do the secular authorities always have to impose on us what we should do for ourselves? Why do we have to wait to have it imposed upon us by secular authorities? That's something that we have to add. I'm not saying that, you cannot come here and expect everything to be exactly to suit you as it was in whether it was in Passaic or Teaneck or wherever you come from, Muncie. It's not. You're not the boss here, you're a newcomer. But there are some things that we do have to offer. We don't have to simply hold ourselves up and say, no, I must have been entirely wrong in what I saw in education for my children. The way I grew up is not right, as we'll discuss a little bit later. Many of us are here because the America in which we grew up doesn't exist anymore. I mean, I'm probably the oldest person in the room, but even if I were 20 years younger, I'd still say that's the case, that most of us in an increasing sense of America in which we grew up, we thought it was a pretty good place, ain't anymore. It doesn't exist, it's just disappearing before our eyes. But anyhow, so that's for the point about what we do have to contribute in, especially about the educational alternatives. I would say that's one thing that you want to get the word out there to friends in America that may be contemplating Aliyah, told that children will be thrust into a system which will be totally foreign to them. There are many options, and those options are increasing. I mean, I just mentioned off the bat, Yaakov already mentioned Operation Home Again. And so they're building a community right now. The first community of the organization is building is in Fuq. And they already have 40 to 50 families. And Rob from Garland, Pennsylvania is moving with his Kehillah. It's a different model. Kehillah moving en masse as a community, because there's been an American vice mayor of Fuller for the last 25 years. They've got to go. And so they have excellent connections. They've had a lot of assistance in setting up and getting a whole set of buildings which were waiting for occupancy. But they're, and they're at school, and they're bringing better educators in their late 60s and 70s, people that are, sort of looking to still start something new. They want the excitement of what it was like when they were young educators. I mean, one of the educators that I happen to know, only because his wife always used to write me angry letters all the time that I was an insufficient Zionist in her mind. So if you know Karen May and you see her soon, tell her that I came and gave a speech on why everybody should come to Israel. But I mean, that's an example of someone who's coming. But the one rule that I asked the person who's heading this project when I was interviewing him this week, he told me the one rule is that wherever your child goes from this school, whether it's Hesder or Rama, no one's ever going to threaten your child. If you go there, your brother will be accepted in the school. In other words, we want an education that's suitable. You'll make your choices as parents. Your child will make, according to your child, according to their needs, you'll be able to make that choice without fearing that you're going to suffer from repercussions. That's the one rule here. And by the way, they've had excellent support from Holocaust money, from those who recognize that we're going to have to also make accommodations. The conclusion of my article, the November 23rd article, on planning for Aliyah, is that we in Israel have to recognize that we can't try to just cram everybody into the same box. There are too many examples of people who went back because they were dissatisfied with the education available to their children. And I think that message is getting across. The same message, just as an aside, but I'm one of the people who helped me most actively in all these projects is Yitzhak Pindris, who's the regulatory Knesset representative. But I once told Yitzhak, I said, Yitzhak, you cannot track out of Chaim Kanievsky on Arab election and expect, and bring him to Ramat Beit Shemesh and expect that everybody's going to vote for Dekla. It's not going to work. There's been nobody there for the last 3 years when they need help getting their child into the school. There's been nobody to talk to in the area. They'll vote for the candidate who convinces them that she's got their interests better at heart. They're not going to vote because Rabbi said you should vote because they've never seen it before, and they know they won't see it again until the next election. You got to be on the ground, and you have to show that you're responsive to the needs of the people whose votes you'd like to get. I think that there is today a revival of the spirit that once existed in the early 1800s when both the Talmudei Torah and Kamenet Ra, stolen Hasidim, there were other Hasidim, the Vitebsk, I think, but in any event, primarily these two groups, they were both in the Hasidic world and in the Litvish world. There was a strong move to Eretz Israel. The Yerushalayim community was basically created in that period. There were communities in Tiberia, Spas, and so forth. And it was a lot more difficult, as Aliyah is today. It was a lot more difficult then. But we see that there's an incredible spirit of people simply saying, this is the time. The time has arrived. I mean, Aliyah was up 32% last year. That's a big jump, especially when you consider that Corona made it a lot more difficult to make Aliyah. It made it even difficult to get in the country in any form. So that's an indication. I was talking to the Haredi, the person who is on the ground operating the Haredi desk of Nefesh B'Nefesh last week, and he told me that 10% of his clients, 10% of the new tikkun he's opening are people who are primarily Yiddish speakers. And they have to fill out the documents on why are you coming? And they don't just say, why are they coming? They're not saying, I'm coming because my record is here, I'm coming to that reason. They're coming because they say it feels right. Eretz Israel is our home. And I'm feeling increasingly uncomfortable in America or whatever, but they are coming. And I think this is important. They recently had an article in the Haaretz, I think it's November 30th, called ultra-Orthodox Aliyah has reached new highs, and the reasons why. And they quoted 4 people in there. Each one of them was headed, and they didn't even get to Operation Coming Home. They quoted at least 4 people there, at least 2 of whom lived in Ramat Beit Shemesh. Somebody quoted that Menachem 8 kids from Lakewood, and he's bringing 2 groups within the next year, one to the south and one to the north. The housing problem is one of the crucial problems. How do you want to bring incomes in the community? How do you find housing? Ramat Beit Shemesh has always served as a model. Unquestionably, when you hear that somebody's making Aliyah, you basically say, where? The answer is almost inevitably Ramat Beit Shemesh. But Ramat Beit Shemesh, there may be a lot of hilltops around there, and there will be more Americans, but they won't be coming to Ramat Beit Shemesh Hala, because space is running out, and space is pretty expensive. We're going to have to find other places. The truth is that the situation is such that the ability of replacing has become much more on the agenda. For instance, the bill passed last weekend in Knesset to double the size of the Golan. Well, you're going to have to find people who live in the Golan. They're not doubling the size of the Golan without bringing employment possibilities there, without bringing a lot of infrastructure, which will be there, but somebody's going to have to move there. That's one place where new immigrants can go. Fula was another case. Fula is an expanding Haredi community as it is, but this community is going to be somewhat separate. I mean, it's not geographic. It's not just a continuation of the existing Haredi community in Fula, but there is already an infrastructure there that precedes the community, and that's and plus, you have a deputy mayor who's an English speaker who's lived here most of his life, but the fact is that there's a lot going for a community. Kakao, Karen Kayemet Israel, has allocated, wants to bring 1.5 million Jews to both the north and the southern part of the country. In other words, there are places that are going to be opening up. I mean, we may first have to reclaim them from the Arabs and Bedouins in the south. We may have to reclaim some of these areas, but they will be opened up. And when they are, it's a wonderful place for Aliyah and for the possibility of those who are coming out of Aliyah to have a place to go. That's, I think the phrase of Operation Coming Home is talk about pull, you talk about push, and you talk about possibility. So the push from America, I think it's pretty clear. It's both, it's getting tougher and tougher to live in America to feel that you're part of the community. And the dangers are coming. There is a danger. There is right-wing anti-Semitism, and that's it. But there's not. The worst place to be in America today is the place where Jews always wanted to be. Where'd you want to be? Harvard, Yale, Princeton. You don't want to be there today. You really don't want to be there today. I mean, my undergraduate alma mater, the University of Chicago, is one of the least woke campuses in America. It emphasizes to every student, we don't have the trigger warnings here. We don't accept infringements on other people's free speech. And yet in Hadassah magazine, I recently read a Jewish student writing that, saying that when COVID ended, it was time to return to campus. She was afraid, she was physically afraid to return to campus wearing a Jewish star. 50% of American university students, Jewish American university students, I mean, most identified, said that sometime in the past year they felt it necessary to hide their Jewish identity. Hide as Jewish. I mean, I suspect most people here have spent some time on a university campus. So the idea that you could not be on a university campus without hiding your religious identity. Another student said, if we want to be participants in any of the progressive movements, you know, whether it be, well, whatever it is, whatever aspect of progressive movement, we will not be accepted, we cannot participate unless we first renounce Israel. First have to denounce Israel and say, you know, they're the enemy and we're with Students for Justice in Palestine, a largely Jewish group or something like that. But that's the situation on the campuses. The most powerful figures on American university campuses today are often the diversity czars of diversity and equity. So they just did a study where they looked at the Twitter feeds of about 760 such officers on 65 campuses. When they commented on Israel, their comments were 96% negative. So you're talking about a situation in which those who are charged with protecting minority rights on campuses are likely, not every critic of Israel is anti-Semitic, but when it's 96% of your comments on Israel are critical, whereas your comments on China, which is, you know, actually is conducting real genocide, real attempt to destroy a people of the Uyghurs and so forth, don't attract that negative comment, then there's something amiss here. Jews are simply not an accepted part of the people they always identify with on the left. They're just not accepted anymore as Jews. And you know, Duke University, a pretty elite university, they recently, student government voted to not to disallow a student group which was openly supportive of Israel on the flimsiest pretext. Somebody had written that a Palestinian student or an Arab student written, you know, Israel is an apartheid racist state, and they said part of the reason we need to form this group is to answer the types of claims made by this person, and they named her, but she hadn't been trying to hide her. They said, well, by singling her out, you lost your right to be a student organization. I mean, that kind of thing where students who have been on birthright trips and know are barred from student government, UCLA, USC. I mean, these things are simply, they're unfathomable to us. I mean, it's very hard for us if we think back 20 years to appreciate the intellectual tenor of America. And these people are these universities who they recently asked me from Yale Law School campaign. I said, what would it take to get you more involved in Yale Law School? I said, well, if you stop embarrassing me, that would be a start. But used to be when I'd be talking to somebody on the phone here, and I'd get the feeling they were increasingly frustrated with me. So I'd say, you know, I know I sound like an idiot, but you know, I did get through Yale Law School. So I'm not as dumb as I sound. Now when I say that, they say, now you just proved it. So I don't say it anymore. I have no backup. I have no backup line to convince them that I'm not quite as bad off as they might think. I just cite my age. In any event, these places are, it's a scary situation when we think about the places that we've been, which we in some ways were happy to get into. Thought we were going to improve the society. America seems to many to be a failing society. Great empires throughout history. America's the last 150 years been the most powerful country in the world, certainly since World War I. At least 100 years been the most powerful country in the world. But as all the historians point out, great civilizations, great powers don't generally fall because of external threats. They usually fall through internal rot. And you have a country where people simply can't stand each other. That there's so much that's in there is a middle ground, but they're increasingly not heard. And instead, you have a country in which people are simply at everybody's throat, view the others as evil incarnate. It's not a pleasant place to be. I mean, my wife and I walked around Williamsburg and Monticello 2.5 years ago, and we found actually people were pretty pleasant. It wasn't like that. It wasn't all rioting in the city, but the crime rates, you can't figure out where you'd like to live. I can't even figure out where I'd like to go if they ever resume speaking in America, because I don't know where to be scared. I mean, 12 cities last year, 12 major cities set their all-time murder rates. I'm from Chicago, so 14 people killed over a weekend is now becoming the standard reading. I guess. And gone to the University of Chicago, which is even somewhat good, you take your life to there. And then yet the students on campus, rioted last summer. They wanted to get rid of the campus police until some student was killed, and then they rioted to bring back the campus police. But that's the situation. It doesn't seem like a society that's flourishing. You have to think of two almost octogenarians, not necessarily in full control of themselves, either by virtue of a lifetime of not being in full control of themselves or old age, are come up with a president where something has gone amiss. That's not true in Israel. Oh, and then you also have to feel like you're watching your Jewish brothers melt away. I mean, they're just disappearing. Not very interested in Judaism. And this is even in modern Orthodox world, the current issue of Jewish action is worried about the fact that only 68% of the kids raised in non-Orthodox homes stay with religion. I mean, part of that is the worship of the college campus and not to be able to take into mind what might await their children there. But that's pretty frightening. But of the non-Orthodox population, so Anna Garfinkel, who was editor of American Interest, wrote in 2019 that in the next 36 to 54 years, the American non-Orthodox Jewish population will shrink to 1/3 to 1/4 of its current size. They're simply gone. Simply gone because there's no interest. They have not a close enough sense of the Jewish story or anything that connects them to being Jewish. The Jewish ideas make any difference to them, and they're willing to study Jewish text. Anyhow, for this, you can read all about it in the Superior Journal, where I have a piece on Jewish continuity. But the statistics are pretty grim, and there's a demographic death cycle by virtue of late marriage, if at all, late childbearing, if at all. And of course, the intermarriage rate, which means that 4 out of every 5 marriages involving a non-Orthodox Jew are intermarriages. That doesn't give you a very bright future. Here, I think it's just the opposite. I think the potential Jewish growth, Torah growth, is still untapped in Israel. I think it's amazing. It's amazing that we haven't invested greater resources in Kiruv here, because payrolls are so much greater. I've been involved for a number of years with an organization called Kesher UD, which happened as a branch they work with, among other things. They work with pre-adoption academies, if you know. And there's one group that comes out of Vermont Bay Shemesh once a month, the Shabbos during the year. And this group is jumped from 3, if you know, to 24 in the space of 9 years. That's 1,200 kids who are going to be officers in the army. They're the elite of Israeli society, the most idealistic. And the push to join this organization is all come from the Latino. They're demanding to get in. They keep asking. It's not totally limited by the resources of Kesher and how far they can expand. And I think there's a reason for that too. You live in Israel, it proclaims itself to be a Jewish state. It's not really necessary to argue about that, but they have to ask the question, why does the collective identity of Jewish people make such a big difference? Why should I be willing to potentially sacrifice my life, give up 2.5 to 3 years of my life for army service to protect the collective existence of the Jewish people? You have to come up with an answer for that question. And I think everyone instinctively understands that the answer must have something to do with Torah. I mean, there's never been a flourishing Jewish community without a strong knowledge, a strong sense of tefillah, a vibrant learning community. It doesn't exist. It's sustained itself and flourished over a serious period of time. And they're interested in learning. There is an interest. Every place that we go, every place and every field organization, I'm not talking about there are many others being managed. Even the Torah Mishpachah, they're teaching phenomenal success in terms of impression and impact on the people who participate in the program. So here, we don't have to simply sit back and watch our fellow Jews disappear from the map. It's an exciting country. Once you came to Israel, you would come into the wilderness. I mean, we waited here well over a year and 2 for a poem when we first came. I mean, this is a joke. Israel is in many ways. You're not making such a big sacrifice by coming. We have excellent medical care. We have to attract the Orthodox. We have minimal school tuition compared to what it costs to live in America. We have minimal health insurance costs compared to what it would cost to live in America. For many professionals, it makes good sense to come to Israel, but it's also the spirit that people are not giving up. There are 173, something like 173 countries in the world in which in every one of those 173 countries, they find that as the number of children goes down, the per capita income goes up. There's only one exception, Israel. It's the only exception that there is. Now, ultimately, these 173 other countries will have a problem, which is no people. You cannot sustain a country where you have an aging, a very aging population dependent on a younger workforce, and the younger workforce doesn't exist. So their long-range prospects are poor, even on their own terms. But there's a sense of optimism about that. David Goldman, an intellectual luminary, once did a graph where he plotted the birth rates on the vertical axis and the suicide rates on the horizontal axis. And there was one country that Israel was in a quadrant all by itself. Not the left quadrant, all by itself. You know, it was literally a nation dwelling by itself. And that could be considered the optimism of man. I mean, if you can't decide to have children, that is a reflection of something. You have something about your life that is important enough and exciting enough to you, something that you want to pass on to another generation. If you don't so, then there won't be any children. But if you do, then we have children. The average Israeli is the only country, not secular, not religious Israelis, have over a child above replacement level. They're the only country in the OECD that has above replacement level child fertility rates. It's a country which is excited. There's excitement in it. $25 billion invested in the Israeli economy by foreign investors in the last year, second in any country in the world, only after the United States. I mean, this is a country where things are happening in the medical care field, and there are places for those with there's a dearth of doctors, a dearth of nurses, a dearth of physical assistants. I mean, professions that exist in America are only beginning to become recognized here, but there are a lot of things for Americans to bring here and to work. There's a lot of potential here. And then there's this system. You're really part of Jewish history here. It's clear that the future of the Jewish people lies here. It doesn't lie anyplace else. Over half the Jews in the world, close to half the Jews in the world are already here. If you want to be part of the Jewish story, this is the place to be. And Orthodox Jews identify, they're familiar with the country. 17,000 kids a year come here on the year program. So this is not a completely foreign country to them. They're well suited. They're well suited for Aliyah. Many of them have considered at some point in their lives. I mean, one of the Asatmar Hassan from Monroe was quoted in an article in Haaretz, and I wanted to come for 12 years. It took me 12 years to convince my wife. Now she wants to come too. You know, there's group after group setting up and trying to encourage the Aliyah. So I said the topic was, what could you do to encourage this? Okay? I don't want to completely. My wife once said to me after a speech, why do you have to tell them that you're ADD? They all figured that out for themselves. Okay. But now she's going to tell me this again tonight. But what can we do? And actually, there's a lot. First, make sure that Ramat Beit Shemesh is a success, because Ramat Beit Shemesh is the flagship building for American Aliyah. The model of the shul rab, at least I can think there are probably four. Rabbi Lelinowitz is talking about his shuls also English speaking. There are at least four and probably more English speaking shuls here where Arab is the central figure. Arab is the central figure of the community. But beyond that, let's take this project, Operation Coming Home, which is Arab and learn about it. Because it tells her an American young Rob is bringing his Kehillah, not all of it, a good part of his Kehillah from Yardley, Pennsylvania, to a pool with housing already in place, with educators, with preeminent educators already committed to running the schools, with the city that wants them. You know, I'm not sure the Israeli government is enthusiastic. Certainly, the current government is enthusiastic about an influx of Orthodox Jews. But I do think that most mayors, I can see their city bigger cities need bigger budget. The mayors have interest in many places. The mayors have been very forthcoming about wanting to encourage this Aliyah. And then you have to explain to them, first of all, that American Korean unit. I don't know if there's really such a thing as a parallel of American. There's a Shivish, but I don't know if there's Israeli or Canadian who will come into the neighborhood and say, once they get poor people that are trying to close the streets on Shabbos, that's not our, we're not territorialists in the same way. And that does have to be explained to mayors that don't be afraid of us, you should be happy that we're coming because you'll be happy with us. But one of the things that you can do, first of all, you probably, how many people here have only been here 5 years or less? That's quite a bit. And I'm sure everybody who's been here 5 years or less has a lot of friends who are contemplating Aliyah in the States. I think everybody here has friends who are contemplating Aliyah. They have to have information, supplying information, being in contact with people, to tell them what's going on, changes in education. Now, that doesn't mean you have to encourage everybody to come. There's a big mistake. Many years ago, I read a collection of essays by Edmund Wilson, who was a famous literary critic in the 30s, and it said that San Diego was the highest suicide rate in America. People got there was no place else to go. People should not come to Israel because they think that they're coming out and have all the problems will be solved. It's not a solution. It's not a magical pill. And no one should try to convince anybody else of that because it's bad for the families and it's bad for the overall Aliyah. But it's simply not a thing to imagine that your marriage will be dramatically improved or anything else simply by virtue of moving it. That doesn't. It's not necessary that everybody move immediately to Eretz Israel. But in terms of growth, of feeling excitement, of feeling to be part of something major, just as it's a lot easier than it was when the Hasidim and the Talmudim brought came and many of them died. The mortality rates were extraordinary in Yerushalayim. Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld lost a dozen or more grandchildren in one epidemic, maybe in the 1972 epidemic. But we're not in that situation today. It's a booming country. It's a country where you see the building every time I go out on the street. I don't even hard up because I don't. And then every time I go out, there's a new building right around the corner. I mean, that is one of the reasons I don't go out is because there's always a new building which is blocking traffic. But even were I to go out, it's struck by the amount of building that's going on in every place you look. The country is growing, the country is flourishing. Not that there's not a loss of that. I'm not saying that the bigger, the better. But there is a vibe here, and I think that a lot of people see in our community, North America, or even not only the North American immigrant community, there's going to be a flood from Europe too, probably even a bigger flood sooner because there the push is more direct. I mean, in America, there's anti-Semitism, but they're not usually, it has not yet gotten the murderous anti-Semitism on most college campuses. I mean, the left will take its other times. It will try to cut off aid for Israel, which try to impose educational restrictions. I mean, not only our college campuses in Africa too, but the Jews and the supporters of Israel and African religion in general, they do not, religious people do not have an easy time. So one thing you can do is give people information. Sometimes people are living in that. I think sometimes we have a clear view from here of how badly things are falling apart. I mean, for 5 or 6 years, I've been writing about the intellectual climate in America. The New York Times, whatever it is. Whatever happened to my old friends? Where did the liberals go? What happened to the liberals? And people ask me, why do you write so many columns about that? I said, they're really Aliyah columns. That's the subject. That's what I'm really aiming at is Aliyah. You're living in an insane asylum. And it's time to think about getting out. There's another thing. Many of you can be talent scouts. What do I mean by a talent scout? By a talent scout, I mean somebody, if you have a model of a young Rav bringing his kehillah, and he's not the only one, to Mali Amos, Rav Chaim Kanievsky's grandson, Kolodetsky from Lakewood is bringing a garim with at least 20 families to Mali Amos' summer. And Rav Chaim Kanievsky in the article in the Haaretz, they quote one person who lives in Mat Beit Shemesh. He said, I will make the final decision to make come when I talk about that kind of thing. He said, come. You should know that 68% of the Aliyah in Israel identifies itself as somewhere on the yeshivish spectrum in American terms. Another 20% is minor Orthodox. So there's a tremendous, the Aliyah that's coming is primarily a religious Aliyah. But one of the crucial things that we can do, and this is what Rabbi Apostol said to me, is identify rabbis who might be looking for a real challenge, who feel that they have a young congregation. They're primarily aimed at young people, 20 to 30, before you have their children in the tween years, for which we all know that Aliyah is difficult. But we were lucky we never decided to make Aliyah. We just came here and stayed. And so our children were all born here, made fun of our Hebrew, but it's hard. And so they're aiming at young couples and even singles. And to identify the bonding that you know from the past that you were close to in America, and see if this idea strikes them. There'll be a lot of people, and educators too, not just shul or bonding, the idea of taking a community. This is the breakthrough now. Shul and community-based Aliyah. We don't come as individuals. You come as a group with an infrastructure with you. That's a breakthrough idea. There's a lot of people working in this area now. It takes a lot of work, but the mayors are for it. The Canadian politicians are for it. One of the biggest indications of this new spirit that I described earlier is the fact that in the recent World Zionist Organization elections, the third biggest slate was a yeshiva slate from America. They've never run a slate before. And there was a very progressive left-wing slate that doubled its vote, but good better because they were more than doubled by the yeshiva world started to vote. That's another sign of what's coming. And she had a raised desk and so forth. There is a look in the air. Anything that we can do by being in contact with friends, contemplating Aliyah, and by being in contact with perhaps those who might imagine this is something that would challenge you. This is something that, sometimes the rabbi has built a kehillah in America, but it's now a kehillah, it's established. You can turn it over to somebody. Come here, you start fresh, and you're much needed, and you have a lot to do. And so we're going to count on Rabbi Hader to bring these 5 times. It is exciting. I'm going to turn it over now. I'll take questions, but at the end, Yaakov and Bathsheba told me here Operation Coming Home to answer questions about what specifically can be done and how it's. The other thing they mentioned, if anybody's feeling well, I've been in Ramat Beit Shemesh and I really did my piece here, but now maybe I should join another new immigrant community and offer my expertise and my experience. That's another opportunity. We are looking for people who have made Aliyah and might be willing to do. The shul here, obviously, you didn't build this little shul unless you did this beautiful shul, unless you were expecting to have a large number of people here. So if there's any people who haven't yet managed to buy here or whatever, or thinking of transferring or going as a temporary advisor, that's another possibility. Okay, so I'm going to, I don't really know. I'm sure I didn't convince any of you to make Aliyah, right? I thought we only have one person. I don't move here. One little bit. We had no chance to start with, right? So I will take a few questions if anybody has them. But then I just want to make the availability of the Colvins known to you who have been working very, very hard on this particular initiative. And talk to them about what the specifics that you can do. Yeah.
I remember me from our Rubens here from 20 years ago as anyone, but I was very involved in building and helping build the show here. And one of the greatest problems that we faced was the lack of positive English-speaking representation on the local level. And I feel the same way on the national level too. A great lack, like you said, about Pinterest. Bringing up Tanyevsky here, there was just very little support in getting big projects going. And we went through a lot of trials and tribulations as we managed to get the show built. I hate to think that other communities would have to go do the same thing.
Okay, let's ask a question. Just the one, Rabbi, Yitzhak Pinterest is the son of a rabbi from Orsamed. One of the most. The question was, we don't have representation either locally in the English-speaking community and inadequate representation in the local.
Or actually called the
expect a lot of Aliyah. What can I do to help? What can I do to help? I'm available, I'll do what I can. I never got a call back. He said, we're working on it. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I haven't seen anything really done on the ground from the point of view of the federal government. Almost nothing other than talk. So we can't, unfortunately, we can't just bring people. And I have that on a personal level, I have that issue. I have a cousin now who wants to come here from Baltimore and a group, even a group. And we're talking about going over there and helping the group buy in Israel. The biggest problem is that people want to come to what they change. They don't want to go to, you know, Afula and down to Beersheba and other places like that. And at the end of the day, we need to increase building in the areas which the Anglo community is.
Okay, not everybody, no matter how much they do, not everybody will be able to work for my Shemesh. And we are going to have to spread out, but I'm just saying, 2 of the people that I'm aware of are most active. First of all, the election of the state, of the slave Eretz HaKodesh, has completely changed the nature of the Jewish agency. They've been very active. They were so, how to say, the person here is Rabbi Nehemiah Malitowitz, whose father most probably knew in some form or another, but he's one of the most active people in English speaking. They had a big part in getting the gap year students in this year, but there are people. Rabbi Pinkus is a fluent English speaker. Grew up in English speaking, grew up with Buffalo University. That's going to change. And I think the Eretz HaKodesh slate is a real watershed. There was an article in Mosaic last week called The Haredi Moment Has Come. Looking at Eretz HaKodesh, he said now the rest of the world is on alert that if this group starts to participate in the general Jewish community, they will come to dominate, which means that it will have some impact on that community and how they take their responsibility. I once started writing a column called, asking the question, how many would like to run and live in a country like that? But I probably would have gotten past the censor, so I didn't write that column. I don't think I'm ready to turn over the country right now to the local council here. I'm wondering again. Anyhow, but I think that will change. The change, the more immigrants come. But if you think you can only live in Ramat Beit Shemesh or Yerushalayim, so join the crowd of people who like to live in Yerushalayim, whose kids can't. My kids had to come to Ramat Beit Shemesh. Their kids be very lucky if they can make it to Ramat Beit Shemesh. They're already buying up in Harish. So I'm saying, we used to have as a kid, our family, while we used to always have a silence, and I never promised you a postcard. We should overpromise the country. And certainly representation counts. Believe me, if one thing inside countries can do is count votes. And you'll be working very hard to service any community that moves as a community or as individuals. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the Goldmans because Gabriel has something.
So, thank you so much for sharing, John. What's being passed out now is questions like, what can we do? So my wife and I, Bachero, stepped into this with Shimon episode, was a verse of mine, and the idea is something very radical, is shifting. It's not just like many of us came, just one family at a time, but actually bringing entire communities at a time right now. And probably this summer we will see the largest group Aliyah that North America's ever seen. And it's just beginning. So what can we do? There's 2 things in particular that we can do. Number 1 is if you know somebody who is a leader, either in Askan or Yoruba back in North America, or I guess we could also do it in Australia, South Africa, or England. But right now we're focused on North America. And if you know someone, we have an information kit, like how do you make it work? And so we have a map. if you're a leader of the community, like, question, how do you make it work? So we actually have information we can send them. Or if you know someone that would like to bring a pretty small group, we can send them. Number two is if you know a family of a child, we're not looking to pick anybody out of this show. You should sit here, and if it works for you, great. But it's a little bit expensive here, and people are looking for other places. So there are other communities that are opening up. One community is opening up this summer, and it's going to be it's Florida. So if you might know people around that they're looking for something that's an opportunity, you have to have a little bit of pioneering spirit to make that work there. The last thing is, if you'd like to be an Aliyah buddy, what does that mean? How many of you remember when you came that people were really helpful for you? I remember telling people, I didn't know who they were. And they're like, yeah, here's how you do internet, here's how you do telephone. So if you'd like to do something like that, or be involved in helping greet people, whatever that might look like. So there's a few of these pieces of paper that are passed around. Just put your name and your contact information, and we'll send you the materials. This is being built as we speak right now. Baruch Hashem, there's a lot of exciting things happening. And we recently locked up 2 buildings in October for 24 units already. And there's apartments that there's an entire community that's being built there, bringing the whole system with them. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities that are happening around the country. And I invite you to be an ambassador, just like people who helped us. Hopefully we can be there to help other people. I want to thank you, Jonathan, for coming. And if anyone has questions, so come on up and we'll be able to give you more information. Someone else.
I could do it anyway, yeah.
My wife's I don't know. I can't. I'm gonna take things.